a price that's just a few euros, a few pounds, a few dollars cheaper, and move to the next printer. Over to more of a relationship, then I'm going to be more loyal and you're going to build a worthwhile relationship with me as a buyer. So that's what today's all about, because that can be a pretty hard change to make, really. And it's part of the whole buying journey that I think many people in the print industry have to go through today. So what we're going to cover today is some strategies for you to be able to do that, both in the short term and in the long term. Let's just put this journey into context for a moment. As I said, this is part of a 3-webinar series. So last week we talked all about positioning, and we talked about making sure that you were best placed for the buyer to know your value and for you to make sure that the buyer understood what was happening, because 60% of the job incredibly powerful. So those were the 3 things that we talked about last time in the last webinar. But why is this important for us to go through? Why are these things important? The first thing that I want to talk about is to talk about partnership. Partnership is a very important thing for you to have with your clients, and it is something that's created if you're able to put the right sales pitch over to them. Because at the moment, if I'm sending that PDF over to a printer, that's not a partnership. I'm not necessarily valuing anything apart from the production of a commodity item. So therefore, it's important that you go through these correct sales pitches and create these worthwhile relationships with your customers and your prospects, so that you can create a true long-term partnership with them and start building a true relationship together where you're going to value each other and you're actually going to work together as well. The second thing that I'm asking that I think is important is that will give you more control over your pipeline, because suddenly you won't be scrabbling around over trying to find the next PDF. You will be trying to you'll have control over your sales pipeline, and you will therefore be able to achieve better sales. So 3 things there. And if you don't go through these sorts of strategies, you're not going to get the sales targets that you need. You're not going to get the sales targets that you need, because you're not going to have that control over your pipeline. You're going to be looking for all these individual jobs for you're going to be looking for these jobs with clients who aren't necessarily going to have that long-term relationship. Then you're not going to be able to create those partnerships with people. So that's why these things are important. And now we're going to move on to the first topic of this webinar, and that is selling on price and how so many in the print industry do this. So I'm just going to ask Michaela just to advance a few slides. Michaela, if you can get to the slide that is saying selling on price. So we're having a few technical difficulties today, as you might have realised, and I'm managing the slides remotely. So apologies for the fact that some of the things coming up on your screen haven't necessarily synced in with what I've been saying, but hopefully we're back on track now. So 3 things that mean that a printer is selling on price. And the first of these is asking for quotes, because that looks like you're begging with the buyer. You are at the point where you are leading with a request for a quote. So many printers come through to me, and could be the next slide please, Michaela. So many printers are coming through so that and are coming to me and are introducing themselves to me, and the first thing that they say is, or practically the first thing they say is, can I have a quote? And that's immediately putting the conversation into a different context. It's putting a conversation into a price-led context straight away, many people say, why don't you try us for a quote? They don't try and sell me on the value of their company or the sort of solutions that they can have. They just say, can we have a quote? And therefore, I'll either ask them to go away because I don't think they're worth dealing with, or I'll give them a quote and see what happens, because I might as well try and see if there's another cheaper printer out there. And that's the mentality of many buyers these days. So therefore, it's important that we don't try and have quotes in the first part of the conversation. And it's a very tempting thing to do, to try and move that on, to try and get something into the system, to try and tempt the buyer with price. But the second issue with selling on price is the fact that it does sound pretty desperate. If the first thing you're doing is asking me for a quote, then it just sounds like you're really trying to fill your presses up. And that doesn't create a particularly good impression for me as a buyer. I'm thinking, here's a printer in trouble. Either I'm not going to use them, or some buyers may go down the route of, well, again, let's file them a quote, because if they're desperate, they're going to have a cheap price, and that's what they're being asked to engage with the printer. That's the basis on which they're being asked to engage the printer. And thirdly, many printers also send out email blasts, they send out letters, and they approach people all exactly the same way. Do you remember in the first webinar we talked about the fact that many prospects feel pretty faceless because the printer isn't engaging with them in their market sector or as particular people. So therefore, again, if we're not engaging with people, we feel faceless, and it becomes more of a transactional relationship. And again, it comes down to being a price-led relationship. Now, I'm sure that's what I can hear you all thinking at the moment, because it's not a nice thing to think that actually we might be doing that. But I would hazard a guess, and I hope that I've got the 2% on the call today, but I would hazard a guess that 98% of printers or thereabouts do actually put price-led selling is one of their strategies at the moment. And I'm going to take one example that I had quite recently that came through to me as an email. Now this is probably one of the worst examples that I've seen, so it is maybe slightly exaggerated compared to many of the sales emails that come out, but nonetheless it is an example that I had, a real life example. I've taken the very wording from the email, and I've had a number of emails that are really not dissimilar to this particular one that I had. So this is the email that I had. It says, "Hi Michael, I hope you are well. How are you finding trade at the moment? For us, it has been very up and down. At the moment, we are very busy, but as always, we want more work. So if you have anything that is suitable to my presses, both B1 and B2, then please contact us for a quotation. If we have already quoted and you know that something is in the pipeline, then please let me know so I can arrange the schedule. I look forward to hearing from you." So what's wrong with this email? I probably don't need to tell you very much of this, but let's just go through it anyhow. The first thing is, it says, "Hi Michael, well, my name's Matthew, and it's nice if I'm called by my right name. It's nice if I'm felt that someone's engaging with me rather than I'm just the recipient of an email blast and that nobody really cares about me, because then I'm not going to care about the printer." Secondly, they are saying that they are pretty desperate for work, because the first sentence of the main paragraph says, "For us, it has been very up and down. At the moment, we're very busy." And that implies that right now it's okay, but it's been bad in the past and they're expecting it to be bad again in the future. And he follows up with that, "As always, we want more work." So they're saying, I really want more work. There's that desperation coming out in the tone of the email. And actually all he's doing is not really telling me anything about his company. I know he's got a B1 and a B2 press. That's all I know about his company. He gives me no reason why I should use him. He gives me no reason why I should engage with him. And he gives me no understanding of any value that he as a supplier may bring to the table. All he wants me to do is to fire through a quote and compete and see if he's cheaper than somebody else. It's not a great way for anyone to run a business, whether they're in the print industry or any other sector. So it's all very well me saying this, but what do you need to do if you want to engage the customer? And again, I'm going to come back to the first webinar, and I'm going to say the three things just to remind you. The first being focus on a target audience. If you can talk to small target audience, be they a group of small local businesses, or if they're a very specific market sector. Maybe you want to pick on the education sector and pick on specific types of schools, for instance. Those are very specific target audiences, and immediately you'll engage with them much better. The next thing that you want to do is to focus on their pain. What problems are they suffering at the moment, and how can you solve them? And finally, make it all about me. Make it all about me, the buyer. Don't continually speak about you, the printer. If you'd like more information on this, last week's webinar, if you haven't seen it, it will soon be up online, and that will tell you a bit more about it. So from the end of this section, I'd just like to go through 3 things just to remind you. Don't ask for quotes, first of all. Don't lead a price-led conversation. Secondly, if you do that, it can appear desperate, or if you mention how you are in terms of work. So don't appear to be desperate, because again, lots of buyers these days are hungry wolves. They'll come after a printer that they feel is weak. And make sure you engage with me as a person in my type of company, so that I know that I'm in a sector that you really want to deal with. And that will make me engage with you so much more than just you talk about yourselves, your capabilities, and asking for a quote. An interesting thing that happened to me actually was I spoke to one printer a while ago, and they said that they weren't going to give me a quote, and they gave me a couple of reasons, and I was actually quite intrigued by that as a buyer, because it's pretty rare that a printer says I'm not going to give you a quote. And it wasn't for technical reasons on the presses, so that actually made me want to use them more, because they were saying no. So remember that actually being a little bit reticent about working with a customer can actually be a really good thing at that point. So we've got to the point where hopefully your customers are going to be more engaged with you, you're not leading on price, and you can have more of a value-led conversation. So that's all very well, but does that really get us away from the fact that we're still in very much a situation where the buyer sends the PDF over, the printer produces it, and there's no link, so the buyer doesn't have to have any loyalty? And that's why sticky solutions are really important. Now, depending on the research that you read, it's up to 7 times more expensive to get a new customer in than to upsell an existing customer. And actually, some reports say that it's up to 12 times more expensive. So it's vital that you try and keep your customers on board as much as possible. Rather than having a consistent churn of customers, which is not a great place to be, you want to try and keep them on board and keep them engaged with you for as long as possible. Let's just remind ourselves of some of these sales costs first of all, just to remember that, you know, put some reality between those numbers of 7 and 12, because that can seem as though that's some research report that's done on some random figures. But let's just remind ourselves of the costs that are involved there. So first of all, we've got the obvious cost. We've got the sales team. We've got the sales team's salaries. We've got the sales team's expensive cars to go around. We've got their expenses that come around from visiting clients. The sales team is a pretty hefty overhead for you to have. The next thing we have, you've got your website, you've got your brochures. All of those things take money, but as importantly, they take resource in terms of setting up and in terms of making sure that you've got the right updates happening. Then beyond that, you've also got direct marketing. You should, of course, be doing direct marketing, whether it's by email, whether it's by print, and I'd argue that print very much has a place for you to do this. But you've got the cost of going out to all your customers, the cost of the producing the items, of posting them out, and even email. That isn't free these days. So there's a number of things to do there. And then you're going to get lots of quotes in. So yeah, as you're trying to get new customers, and one of the things that they're doing is they're working with you to find out where you stand in the cost area, particularly if you're focusing on a transactional relationship, then you've got the cost of your estimating team. The more quotes you do that are just to fire out to people in the hope that they will come on board, the more estimating resource you need. And again, that can be a pretty expensive operation to have. And finally, let's not forget the cost of the accounts team as well, because every time you're bringing on a customer, you're putting them on your system, you're doing the credit checks, you're doing all that administration around bringing in a new customer. So if you get a customer in and they have one small low-value job and then they go elsewhere, well, potentially you're making a loss by the time you take all this overhead into account. And as we've said, it's very easy for them to have a PDF and to email it. So that's all they have to do, nothing there. And that means that you're stuck in this interminable sales treadmill. You're stuck having to go through sales, and it's an endless churn of customers, who you're having to take on board, spend all that time and overhead, having to make sure that they're being brought on correctly, and then them showing no loyalty, just send their PDF to somebody else. And again, I can hear this sort of response coming up, that we work in a transactional world, that's how print is these days. But I'm going to suggest that we really need to focus on sticky solutions. I'm going to suggest that sticky solutions are the way to go for printers, and they're going to require a bit of thought. So what is a sticky solution, first of all? A sticky solution is one where, for me as a buyer, it's much more difficult for me to move away from you, the printer, because we've got a working relationship which involves more than me sending you a PDF and you putting ink on substrate. We've got a relationship which involves you creating some value or some other processes in line for my particular requirements. So let's have a look at what some of those sticky solutions might be. There's a number that I want to suggest to you today that some of them, you may be able to work with yourselves. So I've tried to put a few down and hope that some of them will work for you. So the first of them, data management. So many ways in which you can manage a client's data for them. If you're doing any post for them, you should be able to manage their postal files. If you're doing any personalized print, you should be managing that data as much as possible. If you're managing anything else, you're managing fulfillment or lists or subscriptions, anything like that, you could have a chance to help the client with their data. If you can start doing some data work for your client at that point, then you are going to be in a situation where suddenly it's much more difficult for me to move on to another printer, because I've got to worry about whether that printer can manage that data for me. I've got to worry about how I move the data from you to the next printer, and I've got to hope that everything goes out first time without any problems. Or I could actually just stay with you instead. And to me, there's a huge cost, both in time and resource, and also in the danger of things going wrong if I change supplier. Let's look at another sticky solution. The next one, I'm sure many of you will do this, is design. And design is seen as much less of a commodity than print. Design involves the creative input of the designer, and we all know that some are better than others. And if you can show people that you've got the right design studio who understands your client, who understands their sector, who understands what graphics and what looks work for the particular sector that your client is in, that's worth an awful lot to a client. And of course, you're managing the PDFs. So they've got to actually go through getting all designs from you if your terms and conditions say that you will release the designs to somebody else, and making sure they work with another printer. So design is another powerful sticky solution. Another one that you may be interested in, web to print. Some of you will have web to print systems. It's not a big investment these days. You can start having web to print systems much more economically than you used to be able to, and there are pay-as-you-go solutions on the market. So that's certainly an opportunity for some printers. If you can then start putting your clients' designs and requirements online, it makes their ordering more efficient, it reduces overhead at their side, but also those designs are now online on your servers. Again, it's much more difficult for them to move it to another supplier. Then fulfillment. If you can start sending things out on behalf of your clients, if you can start managing complex deliveries for your clients, suddenly you're part of their supply chain, and that makes things, again, much more difficult for them to move. And finally, in my list of suggestions, I'm sure you'll be able to come up with many more, and you may have your own proprietary ideas that you can put with your own clients. But finally, digital asset management. There's a printer I know who used to do a lot of work for a supermarket, and they actually created a system to manage all the pictures and all the content for that supermarket. And even though they began to lose print, they still kept this work because the supermarket was too scared to move it. And they created a great system. And from their point of view, yes, I had to go out and get some more print, but they were making a really good profit from that digital asset management. So it's another area that you might want to think about. So I hope that's given you a good idea of what sticky solutions are and how you can put them into practice and get your clients to stay with you. And that means that you won't have to go through the expense of getting new customers, because it is a cost to you. Right now, for many buyers, this is how it is. It's easy to change supplier. But also, if you create sticky solutions, it will be much more difficult. They'll be much less keen to move from you. And then you can start really working on building a long-term relationship with them. So on to the third and the final part of today's webinar, and that is once you've got your customers engaged, well, I'm going to suggest that they should become an important part of your sales team. That's what a lot of people will be saying. Why should my customers help me? Let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at this both, first of all, in another sector, and then let's have a look at it in the print sector as well. So let's talk first of all about Apple computers. I don't know how many of you, as you're here today, have Apple Macs, but most people I know who have an Apple Mac absolutely love Apples. And you just mentioned the word PC, and you can see them turning away in disgust at this point. Apple has managed to create in a good 90% of its customers absolute raving fans. They won't hear of changing off their platform. To them, Apple is absolutely fantastic. Now, whether you love Apple or not, we all know that maybe in some instances they're not quite as flexible as a PC. And I have both, and I use them both. But if you have a true Apple fan, they won't countenance using a PC. They will absolutely want to use their Apple, and they won't believe anything that's said that an Apple Mac could possibly be a worse computer than a PC. And you know what? A lot of people I know who've got Macs keep saying to me, why aren't you changing? Why don't you get rid of your PC desktop? Why don't you get an Apple Mac? Apple don't need a sales force. They've just got their customers going out encouraging other people to change. Look at a very high-profile person in the UK, Stephen Fry, and he publicly tweets, talks about his love for Apple. So people who buy into Stephen Fry would therefore be very keen to go and change over to Apple. So that's all very well, but we're talking about Apple, huge global corporation, very clever marketing ideas. Maybe it works for them, maybe it doesn't work for printers. I don't know if you remember last week, I told you that I'd recently been interviewing a printer to create some copy for their website, and I spoke to their clients, and their clients couldn't say enough good things about this printer. It was really heartwarming, actually, just to hear them talking about the printer, how they really enjoyed working with the printer. They couldn't do enough to help me, to give me their time for free, to talk about the printer. They'd be happy to get the printer as many testimonials as they wanted. So this printer, a small printer, fairly local printer, had raving fans as customers. And if you can create the same from your customers, you can then start leveraging that fandom. And this is how you do it. You ask for referrals from them. And you have a simple question that you can ask them. And that question is, do you know anyone else who might benefit from our services? And if you've got a raving fan for a customer, they will come up with other people with whom you should be calling. And you'll get a warm lead straight away. Now, it doesn't always happen like this. To be fair, sometimes you ask someone, is there anyone else you know? And you get a puzzled look on their face. And they go, I'm not sure. Now, everybody in business has a huge network of people that they know. I don't know how many of you are on LinkedIn, but you'll have your first level network connection, so people that you're directly connected to. And then LinkedIn also shows you the number of people who are connected to you on the second level. That's the people who are connected to the people who are connected to you. And suddenly there's a huge explosion in numbers at that point. So I've got quite a lot of connections on LinkedIn, but second level connections is absolutely huge, because that's all the people that I know. And that's people you could be reaching out to, because they're the people that your customers know that you may not know yet that you could get to. But because we all know lots of people, sometimes it can be really difficult to think of the right person to say that you should be talking to. So sometimes you need to give your clients a little bit of help in terms of what they are, who they should be referring to you. So as well as saying, is there anyone else who might benefit from our services, you might need to give them some hints as well. You might need to suggest the market sector that they're in. So you might be going, do you know any other gyms or any other hotels, for instance? Sometimes, of course, you'll actually be wanting to speak to a specific person, and you may think that one of your customers knows them. And you can ring up and go, hello, customer, it's just possible that you may know Joe Bloggs. And if that's possible, would you be prepared to make an introduction between me and Joe Bloggs? And that's a very specific person. Other times it might be a little bit looser. So you might be looking for the type of company. You may also be looking for a specific type of person. So you may be looking for young entrepreneurs or procurement professionals with a spend of over X amount. But again, you can start saying to your customers that you can give them some guidance on the sort of people that you would like to be introduced to. And finally, it may not be actually the people. Sometimes you may want introductions to groups. But it's very, very rare when I've asked people for referrals and given them some guidance that they haven't come up with somebody to whom they're prepared to refer me. And it's a great way of getting warm leads, as long as you get the referral done in the correct manner. And I'm just going to take you through quickly now, as the final thing for today, I'm going to take you through 3 different types of referral and help with the ones that you want. Because very often we ask for a referral and we get the referral, but actually all we get is a name. So I'll talk to someone and they go, yeah, Matthew, you should speak to Bob Smith. And that's great, but I ring up Bob Smith and he hasn't got a clue who I am. And yes, mentioning my customer's name will get me a little bit of time on the phone, but I still have to explain to Bob who I am, why we should be talking. It's not quite a cold call because Bob knows my customer, so Bob will give me some time. But yeah, Bob's still a little bit wary. It's still coming over almost like a cold call. So when I give people referrals, introductions, I ask them to carry out what I call an email referral. And this is the one that I always do for my contacts as well. So an email referral is when I will actually talk to the other person, and I will find out first of all that they are actually prepared to speak to the person I'm going to refer them to. So if I've got maybe a printer that I know and I'm going to introduce them to somebody that I know who I think will be interested in buying print from them, I'll talk to that person first and go, listen, I know a really good printer, I really think you should talk to them, is it okay if I introduce you? And then they have a right to say to me, sorry, but I've got a great printer already, or my brother's my printer, or something like that, if there's a good reason why they don't. But otherwise, they've given me permission to introduce that person. So that person, that printer automatically has an in at that point. But of course, they may forget that conversation. So the other thing I will do is I will send an email out to both the printer and to the person that I'm introducing them to, making an email introduction to them. So it reminds them both of the conversation, it gives them the contact details, they can go forward from there, and it's a great way for the referral to work. And that can be very successful. There's a third way for a referral as well, and that's a 3-way hosted meeting. And that can be really powerful because if I, as an introducer, I'm going to put a printer and the print buyer in the same room and host a meeting with them, or maybe the printer's going to take us both out to lunch, or we all meet up at an exhibition, then the printer knows that they've actually got guaranteed time from the print buyer, and I'm going to help them manage that and back them up. That can be very, very powerful. However, it does take time because everyone's got to be free for the meeting. You've got to the time free to make the meeting yourself, and the thing that can go wrong with it is I found out once, I found out within about 30 seconds of entering a room that I was being introduced to a person with whom I did not want to work. And I then had to suffer a 40-minute meeting with them, trying to be nice to them when they were actually a person with whom I just didn't share the same business ethos, and I knew that we weren't going to be able to help each other, and that I wouldn't particularly want to keep in contact with them in the future. So the meeting one has to be managed with caution. So I would always recommend the email referral as very much the best method of referral to have. It's so much better than just being given a name. So from here, just remember that you can get real raving fans as customers. Your customers can be your biggest fans. Also, just remember that then once they are, you should absolutely ask them for referrals. Don't be afraid of doing this, and don't be afraid of doing it more than once. Obviously, they're going to get a little wary if you start asking them every week, but if you can ask them maybe once every 3 months, once every 4 months, they'll be very happy to do that. And finally, make sure that you get email introductions, because they are the most effective way of getting an introduction. So as we come up to the end of today's webinar, I'm just going to give you a little call to action again, as I do at the end of each of these webinars. 3 things that I'd really like you to do as a result of today. And the first of these is to make sure that you review your sales messages. Just make sure that it's not too quote-led, or hopefully isn't quote-led at all. Make sure there's nothing in there that's making a conversation that could potentially be led on price. The second thing that I want you to do, sit down with your team, brainstorm a sticky solution. You may already know that you've got one in place, and that's great, but maybe you've got some work to do there. So brainstorm what you could do that would be sticky for your clients that would work with them. So have a little bit of brainstorming there, and you'll find that, I think, possibly a very useful meeting. And thirdly and finally, make sure that you go to 3 of your clients this week and make sure that you ask them for referrals. So get 3 new warm leads this week as a result of talking to your clients, because that will be very important to you. And that means that you'll be changing from a printer from how many printers are who are focused on a price-led discussion, and moving through to a very different type of relationship with your customer. You're moving into a value-led relationship with your customer. You're moving from a transactional basis through to a full relationship. So that's what I have to say today on this webinar. I hope it's been useful for you. I welcome your questions at this point. I think it'd be really interesting to get some discussion going. I'd love to keep in touch with you. So you can see some various ways of keeping in touch with me here. There's my email address there. If you're on Twitter, please follow me on Twitter. I tweet lots of things about the print industry. If you're on LinkedIn, do feel free to connect with me there, or on Google+. And finally, that's my website. Please go and have a look at it, because there's lots of useful information for printers on there. So back now to Michaela. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Apologies, there were a few hiccups at the beginning with sound and with getting the slides synchronized. But I hope you found the information useful, and I'd welcome any questions at this point. Michaela, over to you.
Thank you very much, Matthew, and thank you everyone for sticking with us with all the technical problems we had there. Would you believe we had a short power cut for a moment? I think it must have something to do with the rain that we suffered yesterday, but as always, a true professional, Matthew, you did excellently, and we were very interested to hear about the raving fans and sticky solutions, so thank you very much for that. I'd like to open up the questions from the panel. Sorry to those of you who have written questions and I wasn't able to answer you immediately, but look forward to discussing them now. So first of all, Matthew, we have a question here saying, what happens if you don't have any sticky solutions in-house? Can we hear you, Matthew?
Right, are you hearing me now?
We are, yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Sorry, we seem to be plagued by technical gremlins today. So if you don't have any sticky solutions in-house, you have a couple of options. First of all, you can look at developing your own sticky solutions, and in the long term I think you absolutely should do this because I think it's important. But equally, some of these things do require capital investment, they do require specialist knowledge, and therefore they're not things that you can slot into place instantly. They require a culture change in your company. Potentially, they require different staff. It's not easy to do. So the other thing that you can do is you can look at partnering with people for some of these. So if you want to do digital asset management, if you want to do data management, there are lots of companies out there that do this already, and design as well. So these are people, maybe you can find a partner with whom can carry out this work on your behalf, but it becomes a seamless offering from your company. So your customers don't necessarily need to know that you have chosen to partner with someone. But because it's a team, in technical procurement language, it's a supply chain with you and your partner, they still have an issue if they want to move to another printer, because they still have to get the information, the data or the design from either you or your partner. So they still have that problem when they're moving from one printer to another.
Okay, well thank you for answering that, Matthew. We have a couple more, so I'd like to get through these. I have one here. What was the best approach you encountered for selling conversion approaches?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question there, Michaela?
Sorry. What was the best approach you encountered for selling conversation approaches?
The best ones that I had were ones, I'm going to look back to my time here at Future Publishing, because I had a lot of approaches from printers there, and a lot of the approaches were the same as you'd have heard last week. The best approaches that I had were ones that gave me something unusual and actually approached the issues that I had. And one of the issues that we had at Future was there's a lot of resource and overhead in the amount of print that we managed. So printers who are actually able to offer me ways of managing that administration and that resource more effectively were the ones I automatically wanted to talk to. Now, the issue for me was that probably there was a group of printers there who were able to offer that, but many of those printers chose to approach me on their printing abilities and didn't really mention the overheads, so I maybe missed some of those. But some printers did approach me and said, we work with managing jobs in very efficient ways, and they would automatically get a meeting with me. If there was a printer who claimed that, I'd probably want to just find out a little bit more on the phone first, but as long as they did have something there that was of interest, I would automatically have a meeting with them. So that was my pain as the buyer at the time. That was what engaged me at that point. So I hope that's kind of a useful guideline to the person who asked the question.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. We have another one come in here which says, which sticky solution do you think is the most important?
Oh, that's a tricky one. That depends on your target market and the type of work you're producing. I would say I think that web to print is a pretty strong sticky solution, as long as you're producing enough different jobs for your clients and they either need the automated ordering and call-off abilities that web to print brings, or they're prepared to put their designs online and alter their designs enough. So if you've got a client like that, then I think web to print is a really keen no-brainer at that point. So that would probably be the one that I focus on the most. The second one that I would go for, if you're dealing with people who are doing a lot of personalized mailing or variable data, if you can start managing their own data in some way that's not just taking a spreadsheet from them and putting it into the final design, if you can start managing some data for them, that again can be really powerful, because you can actually start helping your client then with insights into how they could be using that data and potentially upselling them for more print as well. So I think that's quite a strong one as well. So those would be the two that I would pick on straight away. But I'm aware in the wide format sector particularly, some of those don't work quite as well. So you might need to think more about then about designs, or maybe managing things like QR codes and augmented reality, where again you've got that data element in the background that the client is dependent on you for. And the more data that you start having there that you can host for the clients and share with them rather than just give to the clients, then they get very dependent on you at that point. So those are, I hope that again gives some ideas. It's very difficult without knowing the actual business of the person who asked the question, but those would be my top 3.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Matthew. Just last question. How would you make customers raving fans, and also how is there any further information on this, and where can they learn more?
Right. Let's start with how would I make customers raving fans. The first thing that I would say is to over-deliver where you can. So if you've said that you're going to do something, don't just deliver it on time, deliver it early, as long as early is good for the client. Make the customer feel engaged, so give them as much communication as they would like. Make sure that you go in and visit them and discuss their projects, as long as that's what the customer wants. Talk to the customers as you bring them on board to find out exactly how they want to work, and as far as is realistic, work in the way that they would like. Take them out for a bite to eat or a beer sometime if they've got time to do that, so you can build up that personal relationship. Network within the client's company, so it's not just the person who's placing the order that you want to get as a raving fan. You also want to get people, if you're working with designers at that company as well as a buyer, you want to talk to the designers or the marketing team or the management team. The more people you can connect with at that client, the better. And finally, if they like it, send lots of cake or chocolate as well. That's another thing. Again, it may seem a strange thing, but it doesn't have to cost very much, and clients love that sort of attention. And you will start, really managing that. But the main thing, and the other big thing, is that if you make an error, just sort it out so brilliantly that the customer can't possibly complain, and they will realise that you're someone that will put things right if they go wrong, and therefore trust you to do that again. So that's a quick list of ideas off my head. In terms of where do you find out more about raving fans, is a tricky one, because it's kind of a concept that I worked on myself, and it's not one that I've read huge amounts on. I will write about it more on my blog on profitable print relationships, but there isn't actually any information there at the moment. I'm going to have to go away and think about that one. I guess the quickest way would be maybe to actually look at Amazon, and I haven't tried this, so it may not work, but have a look on Amazon and see if you can search some phrases like turning customers into fans, turning how to create great customers or great clients, and I'm pretty sure there'll be some books on there. Have a look at the reviews and see what people say. It's something that I think you really need to get some insight into from outside the print industry as well, because there's some good people who do it in the print industry, but it's not an automatic industry thing. So I hope that gives some ideas at that point.